All in Sports Network. We love sports.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into All In Aggies. I'm Ben Peck, your host. You are my favorite person in the world for watching this video. Listen to this podcast. We are going to break down. It is another game day weekend in Aggie land. The biggest game of the year for Texas A&M to this point. I know Notre Dame was big off the jump, but this is a moment midway through the season, midway through SEC play, not quite midway, but a chance to go 3-0 in SEC play. You are the biggest game of the weekend. There were a couple other good ones in week one, but this is unquestionably the center of the college football world. It's maybe a little low by game of the week standards, but hey, it's all the same for Texas A&M. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, comment. You've been doing a great job on YouTube helping us out in that regard. Please help us keep it going. Help us make the show better. We're going to have highlights for you on Saturday. We're going to have more immediate post-game reaction. And the more you help us, the more it helps us kind of do that at a better rate and sustain this channel and make it even better as we go down the road. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed what you've seen so far. And by the way, you guys have been fantastic. You know, we're trying to beat the hell out of Texas and everything. And the YouTube subs, we dipped below for a little bit. Now we're back on top, rightfully so. So go ahead and support those guys too if you love college football. But go ahead and give us a subscribe if you enjoyed this and you want more Aggies content on the daily. All right, let's talk about it. The pecking order. If you're new here, this is the top 5 things I'm looking for. I am Ben Peck. That's where we got the name, where I got the name. I say that like we have a giant team of like 5 producers coming up with this stuff. But anyway, top 5 things I'm going to be looking for in this game against Mizzou from Texas A&M. Number 5, handle the moments. As I just mentioned, this is an opportunity, and we've seen Texas A&M do this historically, kind of midway, early mid-season, and have a game where the Aggies pop and they can vault themselves. I mean, they're not going to be undefeated at this point, obviously, but you could vault yourself to a 5-1 record, 3-0 in the SEC, and have a legitimate pathway to that SEC championship game. If you can beat, LSU out at South Carolina, and then the Texas game, maybe you could even afford to drop that game if you take care of the other business. So this is huge. This is huge for the narrative surrounding this team. Not that is everything. It's got to be based in substance, but I would argue, obviously, if you're beating Mizzou, there's a lot of substance there, and it's the kind of launching off point, especially for a first-year head coach, for people to say, this is a different Texas A&M team. This is one to be taken seriously. This is one to reckon with, and this is one that may arrive in the very near future. So, the Jimbo years, even the Kevin Sumlin years, you get off to a good start. I think in the back of everyone's mind, and again, why this is important is not just fans, but recruits and potential transfers. Back of everyone's mind, everyone's like, skeptical, not really sure if that's going to hold up. Like, they'll come back down to earth at some point. They always do. But new head coach is a chance to say, hey, things are a little different around here. And we're maybe ahead of schedule. Maybe not for us, if you're the team, but maybe based off what you think, we're ahead of where we should be. And if we're here right now, imagine where we'll be in just a few years' time. So as for the game itself, how do the players handle that? I think you've learned so much about teams, like not just how they handle adversity, but how just different scenarios, different situations. We've seen a few of those tests. How do you handle a big game right off the jump? They did okay, but room to grow. Okay. How do you handle a game on the road when you missed an opportunity at home and a team that's desperate at Florida? They handled that amazing with a backup quarterback. Fantastic. How do you handle sort of a game maybe similar to this, although against an opponent maybe not of Mizzou's caliber, a team that also is maybe similar spot where you are in terms of, hey, like, not maybe sure exactly how we got here, but 3-1, chance to go to 4-1 and really make things interesting. Arkansas was kind of in the same position going into that game last week. Could have gone either way. Fell behind, and you battle back. So in this episode of Aggie football, how does this team handle the opportunity to have a signature win that registers on the national scale this late in the season? I think it gets harder. It's easier early in the year, I think, to just come out and, the other team, even if they end up being good, maybe they're just not clicking on all cylinders. But now, Mizzou, I know they haven't necessarily been the most impressive 4-0 team, but they are 4-0, and they do have a history from last year. So, and they've had a bye week to get ready for this. How do you handle yourself in that situation? We saw, think of last year for A&M when Alabama came to town, and Aggies had the lead in that game at the half, if I'm not mistaken. Think at Ole Miss, where the Aggies were in that game to the very end. Think Tennessee, right? These are games with that program, under that regime, administration, and a lot of the same players came up short. How does this team, how does this administration handle that challenge? How do they rise to the moment? We saw they kind of wilted late against Notre Dame, but late against Arkansas, it was very good. So can you continue to move that forward? Number 4, I've got Le'Veon Moss, bell cow. Now, here's the thing. Le'Veon Moss, team's offensive player of the week, obviously a phenomenal day. I think 13 carries for, I want to say, I don't have it pulled up here, 13 carries for 117, 9 yards a pop against Arkansas. Obviously, you'll take that. Very good. My question and thing I'm interested in, and I know you got a running back committee there with Amari Daniels and E.J. Smith and Reuben Owens in a perfect world. Can Le'Veon Moss maintain maybe not 9 yards per carry? That's pretty exceptional, but can he in that rushing attack, if you ask him for it, give you 5-6 yards a carry on 17, 19 attempts? And can Le'Veon Moss be a guy who not just does well, but, the thing that was impressive to me was how he got better in that. I mean, he had like 90 yards rushing in that fourth quarter, and he was a little dealing with some stuff, as Mike Elko said in his press conference, anxiety, and he was shaking up a little bit. But he came on late in the game. And granted, he was maybe a little fresh, but can he perform at that level early, often, and give you a rushing attack, just him alone, where he can provide 100, 40, 50, 60 yards? I certainly think he's talented enough and capable. I understand you want to protect him, and you don't want to get the, if this was EA Sports, you wouldn't want to get the wear and tear going crazy. I understand that, but I think you have something really special there with Le'Veon Moss. Is he ready to make that next step and be a guy who can take on that level of workload to help out just other people across the board? We'll see. I think he's more than talented, but really it's also how they want to use him. But that would be quite the revelation to see that, especially given, remember how disappointed everyone was to learn Reuben Owens was injured. Not to say they're not still, you still take Reuben Owens, of course. But I think there was a sense that not quite the sky was falling, but man, that was like your balance to Le'Veon, and Le'Veon with Reuben can be at a certain level. And if he's the guy, it's going to be tough for him to make that level. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Le'Veon's got a chance to prove it to us. And he basically has so far throughout the course of the season. Number 3, iffy Mizzou O-line. The easy one is to say the D-line for A&M. Can they dominate? We could say that every week. These next two, this one included, made a little different. yes, I want to see the D-line give Brady Cook fits and shut down Noel running out of the backfield for Mizzou. But is this Missouri offensive line maybe a little vulnerable, not just to a good game or a good unit, but like that monster game we've all been waiting for? And I think more of that will have to do with where Mizzou's at and finding out that answer than it will exactly how Texas A&M is. I think we know Texas A&M is an elite unit. They're good. They're going to be good. But is Mizzou maybe on shaky enough ground to where those two things can come together and you can see a monster performance? I mean, very good against Murray State and Buffalo. As I said, Murray State, my dad's racers, he and Ja Morant. But that's basketball. They're not really good football school, even by their, OVC standards. Buffalo beat Northern Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, but they're not at the level they have been even in recent years. And then Boston College, Vanderbilt. If this Mizzou team was, I think, a legitimate top 10 team, like in terms of the intimidation factor, it would be because they beat those teams by double digits, 3 or more possessions, either running away with it or comfortably. We did not see that. And I think a lot of that had to do with the offensive line. They've been able to run the ball a little bit, but I want to see against this kind of front, something they have not seen all year. How do they respond? We just talked about A&M responding to a big moment. How does Mizzou respond to a big challenge like that? We'll see. Before I get to number 2, I just want to acknowledge the obvious. Like Marcel Reed, how's he going to do? We talked the other day. This is a chance for him to claim a starting job. You can make the argument that Bowling Green was that, Arkansas was that. This game is sort of I don't want to rehash the whole point of that video, but basically, look, let's just say he turns in another performance to where he's been to this point. You're going to go into the bye week and then kind of a cupcake by SEC standards at Mississippi State. That's more than enough for Connor Wigman. If Marcel Reed is doing well, but not insurmountably well, more than enough, I think, for Connor Wigman in practice to win back that job. But if Marcel Reed plays exceptionally well, like Florida or better, probably even better than Florida, to be honest. I think if it's Florida, if he plays as well as he has to this point, but no better than he did in any single game, I think Connor Wigman will have a legitimate chance to win that job back. If he is dynamic and takes over this game, I don't know that realistically. I know on paper they'll work it back and see who gives them the best chance to win, but I would be surprised if he comes out here and has a player of the week like performance and then Connor Wigman gets back into the mix. So that's not on my list because I just think it kind of goes without saying. And we've talked ad nauseum about it. We talked about the receivers, the versatility of this, the options you have there, the tight ends. All that stays the same. That's just kind of a constant week to week. But I'm trying to look at specifically for this week what is unique to this matchup that I'm looking forward to. And turnovers, A&M wins that game against Arkansas because they held on to the ball and Arkansas turns the ball over 3 times. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to put that on my list. It'll probably be one of the top 5 determining factors in the game. But for this game and moving forward, these are the things that I'm interested to see how they play out. Number 2, this is one, again, we talked about iffy offensive line for Mizzou, and that was sort of a nod to the D line for A&M, but looking at it through a different lens. My number 2 is how good is this A&M secondary? Now, the obvious corollary to this, if I use that word correctly, is Luther Burden, Theo Weiss. They've got weapons. Shut down Luther Burden. Shut down the weapons from Mizzou. That is true, kind of obvious. But what I'm almost more interested in as evaluating that part of the game is maybe we can learn just how good, and I hesitate to say dominant, but just how convincing this secondary can be. Is Will Lee a legitimate all SEC caliber, maybe all American level corner? I know that's putting a lot on him, but if you look at how, like, look, I don't think PFF grades are everything, but if you look at how that stuff comes back, what he's done to this point, his ability to be a playmaker, he's gonna, regardless of who he lines up against on any given play, he's gonna be tested in this game against Mizzou. Some of the other guys coming along, are they Des Ricks' splash performance last week? Is he finding his footing, finding his zone to be able to play not just at a level where he can get on the field and contribute and maybe start, but really be a guy that you have to worry about if you're game planning for A&M and say, ooh, careful if we have to throw over to number 10, but also careful if you have to throw over to number 26. And look out for Dalton Brooks in the secondary or whoever else, Trey Jones, BJ Mays. How good is this unit, and how much is their performance been a reflection of who they played? You've got McNeese and Bowling Green, and Bowling Green gave you some troubles in some ways. You've had Notre Dame. I'm going through the schedule. You've had Florida. Big play potential, but consistency is not really there. And then Arkansas, again, kind of the same thing. Maybe a little more consistent than Florida, but we saw the big playability. But then we saw them kind of get locked up for most of the game after that. So, again, number 2, how good is this secondary? How legit are they? If they're good, that will answer the question of, do you slow down Luther Burden? Do you slow down Theo Weiss? I mean, there's a chance, too. They could have good games go off, look like they're playing well. Maybe they're playing from behind, and they end up with pretty good numbers. And you say, oh, well, they didn't accomplish that box. Like, no, not necessarily. That's kind of how the game played out and dictated it, game situation. So wouldn't necessarily say that if they have a good game on the stat sheet. But how did the stats that they had come about? Was it because that was their, not just their plan A, but was it like the game's even or we're ahead and we're going to keep going to it? And they end up with monster games, or is it, they either end up with not a great game or they end up with what looks like a good game, but understanding the context of it really had more to do with time, score, situation, A&M kind of giving up a little bit to prevent the home run ball and make them earn it. So we'll see. I think we'll learn a lot about the secondary, especially some of those guys like I mentioned, Will Lee in particular. I've been really impressed and encouraged, but this will probably be, they haven't necessarily shown it to this point this year, but Mizzou, their overall level of talent at both quarterback and the receivers across the board, certainly is going to be the best that they've seen to this point this year. How does A&M stack up? Number 1, this one's fun. Listen, talked about it yesterday. Crowd noise can be tough to fully encapsulate, appreciate, but also differentiate. I understand that. You're in a room with 300 people. Let's say a high school gym with 300 people there yelling and 200. Can you tell the difference? Maybe. You're at Reed Arena with 10,000 or 11.5. Can you tell the difference? Or is it kind of on par? You play in a big stadium, it's a big stadium, and it all goes the same. Is that true? Well, and one thing I want to see is the answer to that question. because Kyle Field has had a lot of discussion about the intensity for teams playing games in here. There's been a lot of pointing to records for A&M at home, understandably. And it goes back to the old chicken or the egg is home environment, home records indicative of home environments, especially home splits compared to road, or do good teams make for tough home field environments? And that's what it boils down to. And that's 80% of the battle. We will find out. But also, I will say this, 11 a.m. It's not like if you draw it up, this is how you draw up a monster afternoon, evening atmosphere. I mean, even if it was, if it was Georgia or Alabama, number one, 11 a.m., you'd probably say, okay, they'd find a way. Mizzou has been a little, it's not a traditional blue blood program, even though they are a top 10 team. They haven't necessarily looked great. A&M has looked good at times, but still plenty to question if you want to be cautious and skeptical and all those things. So my point is saying 11 a.m., I don't think it's like, it'll be loud. It'll be packed, of course, but it'll have, I guess here's my thing. It'll have people in the seats. People will be at Kyle Field. But how intense will that environment be, and how long from the jump and all the way through the game can the 12th man sustain it at a level which is like intimidating throughout? Especially finally address the elephant in the room. Like, we've seen the comments from Brady Cook talking about the practice. They play the music right behind them, and you might even say it's louder at practice than it is at the stadiums. There was some other discussion on, I can't remember who it was, so I don't want to misattribute. It was the Cover 3 podcast. They were talking, I think, about this, and some discussion. I think it was a Mizzou beat writer, if I'm not mistaken, talking about, like, listen, Kyle Field, it's big, but nothing crazy by SEC standards. And then Coach Elko kind of acknowledging Brady Cook's comments. So there's been a lot of dialogue and discourse. Can the 12th man back it up? Certainly they will be there by numbers, but I'll say this too. Notre Dame game, it did get a little quiet in there in the lull of that second, third quarter, because, I mean, there was no rhythm to speak of really for either team. There was no big turnovers, no sacks. Can A&M and the crowd, we talk all the time, like coaches do, teams do, about complementary football, offense, defense, and how they mesh together. Like, there's got to be complementary football with Kyle Field and the 12th man and the team. The team's got to step up and provide those plays, those big moments, big game-changing plays on the field, which ratchets up the crowd, which further leads to big plays, which maybe rattles some players from Mizzou a little bit, gets them second-guessing or jumping or playing out of sorts, and you've got complementary football in that sense. We got to see it. Like I said, this is the biggest game of the year. Biggest game. Well, it is the biggest game of the year to this point, but it's the biggest game of the week in college football. Okay? There are no, other than this, there are no top 25 matchups in the country. Not even my alma mater, Syracuse, playing at UNLV tonight. If you can believe it. Syracuse not ranked. But anyways, I joke. This is going to be a huge game, obviously. That goes without saying. I want to see how the crowd not just fares with an 11 a.m. game, but how knowledgeable the 12th man is in mass about some of these comments that have been made. If they make a point to say, okay, especially when Brady Cook's got the ball, we're going to make a point that you hear us, and we make it a little difficult for you out there on the field. So excited for it. 11 a.m. kick. Follow me on the socials at @TheBenPeck. We try to post as much content as I can in the windows I have available to me. Sometimes I can put up pretty good stuff out there before I get it up here, or we discuss here further, or, we do a full highlight package, but maybe I can get a highlight, a clip on Twitter or whatever. So at Peck, like, comment, subscribe, follow, keep the conversation going. Again, you guys are doing amazing. We are, I believe, still the most successful channel here in terms of subscribers for the All In Sports Network, Rogue Media Sports Network. Just a fun little competition, but let's keep it going. We're at, I think last I saw, we're just shy of 400. Let's get through 400 by the end of the weekend if you can. Appreciate you guys so much. And again, we'll be back at a reasonable time Saturday because early kick against Mizzou. I don't know if I have a prediction for this. I lean A&M. But I really could go either way on it. I think we're in for a heck of a game. So be sure to let us know your thoughts. Connect with me on Twitter if you'd like, or in the comment section, and we will see you back here after the game on Saturday.
All In Sports Network. We love sports.